Hi, and thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, I just want to continue with a follow-up on a question that I had the other day regarding a comment made by the Mayor of Medicine Hat when asked during our HUMA committee what he would do to help those in need with the fact that taxes being taken away and put into the pockets of the government and away from actual taxpayers so that they can't afford things, what they would do to help those in need. And the Mayor of Medicine Hat was very open and said he wouldn't charge it at all. What we see here is we've got many different groups, many different provinces that are going to be putting forward many different solutions when it comes to the climate change development. In Ontario, I asked the other day the fact that we have Premier Kathleen Wynne, who not only is charging the carbon tax, but we'll also be seeing a tax on tax because part of that delivery charge also includes the HST. So when we talk about money grabs, that is exactly what Canadians are seeing right now. We talk a lot about the climate change and what it means. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is we're having a mandate put in by the Prime Minister that at the end of the day, we don't know where the money is going. It's no different than in the province of Ontario when they're putting forward something, you give healthcare dollars and ends up building roads. So are we going to see concerns like this? And as I said, going back to the fact is, when people can't afford food on their table or the heat and hydro for their home, how can we honestly put another 4 to 15% on their taxes or asking them to spend more when they can barely spend enough? You know, I have different communities that some are doing very well at the 10 municipalities I have, some are doing very well, some are falling a little bit behind, and I know that these are the communities that are falling behind. They're actually going to have to pay more in fuel to go to their jobs. So not only are they already behind the 8 ball, they're now going to be paying more tax because of this carbon tax that's coming out. A lot of times I hear the Prime Minister talk about how he tries to separate it from province to province, what they're going to do. But as I indicated earlier, when we see the Premier of Ontario have a tax on tax, this is just not right, especially for the people who can't even afford it. My good friend from Carleton had also stated before, when we talk about what people are, and you're smiling at that, but you know, when we're looking at $45,000, we are hurting those people that are below the middle class line. And there isn't actually a ceiling or a floor here when it comes to the carbon tax. We're not targeting in it. We're just saying, here's a blanche carte, take all the money you want. And that's what we're seeing a lot, especially from this Ontario government. And I suspect that we're going to see it from other governments as well. Some may be putting in plans where they're actually going to take money and maybe put it into innovation and technology so that they can come out with really great state-of-the-art programs that will reduce fuel emissions. But we're sitting here talking about carbon tax and forgetting, you know, and I know the parliamentary secretary will talk about us not doing so well. In the last 10 years prior to the Liberal government forming government, we had actually reduced the carbon footprint. So part of my concern is we're talking about spending money and by having polluters spend more money, but you're not taking into consideration the tax-paying people that can't even afford to put a loaf of bread on their table. So those are some of my great concerns. So I really want to hear from the Parliamentary Secretary for the Environment. How are we going to deal with this when there's tax on tax, when people can't afford to fuel up their vehicles to go to their job because they're just paying more and more and more? In Ontario, we did see a jump immediately following the introduction of the carbon tax, and I continue to say that we're going to see more and more and more, just like we did on our hydro bills with the delivery charge. So I'd like to just have some comments on that and how Canadians are going to be able to afford this.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for the question. You know, Mr. Speaker, in our platform, we were pretty clear about our intention to provide comprehensive and national leadership on the climate change file, including ensuring that a price on carbon pollution existed across the country. To respond to the member opposite's question, let me just talk a little bit about some of the actions that we are taking and why. Mr. Speaker, climate change is not a distant threat. It requires action now. Unlike the party opposite, which did virtually nothing for 10 years, effectively pushing the bill for future generations to worry about, this government intends to act. Mr. Speaker, annual insurance claims for severe storms are up from $300 million in the year 2000 to an average of $1 billion today. The National Roundtable on the Environment and Economy estimates the total costs associated with climate change could reach $43 billion a year by 2050. There are real and significant costs to not acting, but there also is a significant opportunity if we do act. As somebody who was a senior executive in the clean technology space for the past 20 years, it's something that I've seen firsthand. In 2015, there were nearly $350 billion of investment in the global clean energy sector, almost a six-fold increase since 2004. To make the transition that is envisaged under the Paris Agreement, it is estimated that a further investment of $13.5 trillion in low-carbon and energy efficiency technologies will be required between 2015 and 2030. However, in Canada, our share of global clean tech exports has shrunk during the past decade by half due to conservative inaction. Our government, by contrast, knows that we must take advantage of this economic opportunity. A key part of driving innovation and clean growth will be done by putting a price on what we don't want, pollution, in order to foster things that we do want, clean growth, innovation, and middle-class jobs. British Columbia's introduction of a carbon price demonstrates this well. You can reduce emissions while growing your economy. Not only that, but British Columbia used its revenue-neutral carbon price to cut taxes by 5% for the middle class and to provide rebates. British Columbia now has the lowest overall personal income taxes in Canada, thanks to its carbon pricing system. Mr. Speaker, many of the world's largest economies price carbon as a means to incent clean growth, and it's not just the countries of Europe. China, for example, is moving to implement a country-wide carbon pricing system. Mr. Speaker, many leading Canadian businesses, economists, and even leading Conservative politicians are on board. This includes Preston Manning, Mark Cameron, Patrick Brown, Brian Pallister, and MPs from the other side of the House. These people all know well that pricing carbon pollution is the most efficient way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to reach our objective of protecting the economy and creating a clean growth environmental future. For this reason, it is a key part of the Pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House understand that pricing of carbon pollution will make our businesses more competitive and innovative, reduce the pollution that threatens the health of Canadians and of the planet, and give us an edge in building a clean growth economy going forward.
For Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Well, thank you very much for the wrap-up of talking points that your government has been giving for the last year and a half. But we've been asking about families, and that's something that not once did you, in your response, talk about. You talked about the regular things that we're hearing from this Liberal government, but not taking into consideration those people who are making $45,000 or less a year, those people who cannot afford a hybrid card and therefore are not getting a $10,000 and $15,000 rebate, instead are having to drive cars that may still be emitting because that's what they can afford because this government has not focused on jobs. So these are some of the concerns. We can sit there and talk about the price of carbon and having people less emit, but what are happening to those families that have to use an older car because they can't afford it and find a new job or a job that may pay more money or anything like that? How are we going to do on that? You continue to talk about, or this government continues to talk about what they're doing for the middle class. What you've done here is you've targeted the lower class without even knowing, and they're going to be paying more and more and more money because they can't afford those rebates that the provincial governments are giving you on these automobiles, and there's many things like that. So I want to know specifically from this member, what are you doing for low-income families who cannot afford the carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would talk to the honourable member. There are a number of different things this government has done with respect to addressing the needs of middle-class Canadians and those working hard to join it. Those would include the middle-class tax reduction that we did in the last budget. It would include the Canada Child Benefit, out of which 9 out of 10 Canadians benefit, raising 300,000 Canadian children out of poverty. I would also say to her that the focus of a carbon price is actually pricing of pollution that you don't want in order to incent the things that you do. The provinces have the ability to structure the use of the funds that are generated through a carbon price in the way that they so choose. Alberta, for example, is actually giving it back in rebates to actually ensure that they are protecting people who actually are not earning a lot of money. British Columbia does that and also actually reduces personal income taxes to achieve the lowest personal income tax rate in Canada. So there are many ways in which you can actually have a carbon price which tries to actually get at the issue, which is climate change and carbon pollution, while also protecting and fostering middle-class growth and the health of those working hard to join.